Hi, I'm Andrew Rich, and if you're like me, you look at the state of modern wrestling discourse and think, wow, what a cesspool. That's why I'm here to tell you about Music of the Mat Remix. That's right, your favorite wrestling music podcast is back with a new format, where I bring on a guest and we play songs related to wrestling-themed topics. It could be a wrestling reference, a wrestling concept, a wrestling pun, things of that nature. Now you might be saying, Andrew, that is a very, very tenuous connection to pro wrestling on a wrestling podcast network. Is this just an excuse to hang out with your friends and talk about music and ignore the rest of the wrestling landscape? Yes. Yes, it is. So listen to Music of the Mat Remix on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, available on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast player of choice.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
To the highway in a brand new day. Gotta let it go. Fast to freedom. Dance tonight together. Hear everybody singing. 你看到我就怕，头皮发麻，我的手。
Welcome back to Open the Voice Gate for February 10th, 2026. We are members of the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find us on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network feed or on our own dedicated Open the Voice Gate feed, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on social media at Open Voice Gate. And if you'd like to donate to the show, click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to the redcircle.com landing site. You click the red boxes to sponsor this podcast. And you can set up a one-time or recurring donation. No obligation whatsoever, but we would like to thank all of our previous donors. I'm one of your hosts. It's your old pal, Mike Spears, joined alongside your other host, Case Lowe. In Case, we were talking before we hit record about how that the Winter Olympics are here, and I feel like as we are reaching a certain age, at least, our sport interests are just getting really, at least for me, it's getting real divergent from what I thought I would really be into, because I don't know if it is that I grew up on 1080 snowboarding and like the SSX series, but I have an issue with the Alpine extreme sports that are going on here, where I just don't get into it at a level where I feel like I should be.
I was recently thinking about how I was thinking about high school, which is never a good thing. And my thoughts weren't like, oh man, I wish I was back in high school. But I was thinking about how I have pretty much had the same interest for my entire life, which can be boiled down to Japanese professional wrestling, punk and punk adjacent music, and skateboarding. And so Winter Olympics come around, I get very, very locked into the snowboarding. I'm more open-minded about the skiing than I have been in Winter Olympics past. I'm enjoying some of the skiing competitions this year. But no, the older I get, like I find myself enjoying just the concept of sport more now than maybe I ever have. You know, this upcoming weekend, I'll have the Daytona 500 on for the last 50 laps or so. You know,
There you go.
I as stated on this podcast before, and as discussed both on and off air with our friend Alan Forel, you know, I got very into tennis this past year. I'm chomping at the bit for the World Baseball Classic. I can't wait for that to begin. I just like competition at this stage in my life. I'm very into any sort of thing like that. I still have a very I was going to say high tolerance, but that would be begrudging. I still actively enjoy the world of supercross and motocross and things like that. I just like seeing contests happen. That's what I'm learning about myself, is I'm just very into that.
Yeah, and I find myself now, like, where we are with how, like, Milan Cortino is essentially 7 hours ahead of us. But like the way to watch things now, like especially for someone like me that's work from home always, is like I just start pulling up the streams of like the recorded men's and women's luge, like all the rounds, and I end up watching it. I go like, you know what's like the one sport that like we really should push further ahead with drone technology? It's all the sliding sports, because they have like 5 turns of it with like a high speed drone, and it's the coolest thing I've seen. And like it's the sport that is one of the few at the Olympics that measures down to the thousandth. So I like start wondering about like, geez, the sliding seems to be going not so well this year. Everyone is basically pinballing out the entrance, and if you get a great run, you're nailing 80 miles per an hour. And I don't know why that draws me in more so than just skiing events. I don't know if it was because of all of the awful ski accidents that I've seen / heard about with celebrities that just turns me off from it. But for some reason, skiing outside of the biathlon just does not do much for me. Maybe it might be my own just natural clumsiness, just not being able to disassociate from there. But I don't know what it is, because maybe it was also like how long the camera was on Lindsey Vonn this year that just kind of, in a way, just decided, you know what, I watch a lot of fast sports, but skiing might just be the one that's just not for me.
You and I talk a lot about the death of the monoculture and how fame is different than it used to be. And I think one of the great losses in that is that we have lost the ability to recognize an athlete or two from very obscure sports. Like, I miss not knowing who the modern day Christy Yamaguchi is. I loved at one point knowing that I knew who the best female figure skater was, and that goes for the Olympics or otherwise.
Sure. Yeah.
The fame of, yes, Tiger Woods, but also the fame of Phil Mickelson being weirdly famous for a number of years there, whereas Scotty Scheffler has 0-star rating to be found whatsoever. He's just not famous, and he's one of the greatest golfers we've ever seen. I think that's incredibly true with tennis players. I think about it a lot with some of the mid-2000s X Games guys where,
sure, Bob
Burnquist and Travis Pastrana and Ryan Sheckler were all, Brian Deegan, were all weirdly famous for an extended period of time.
Especially Pastrana. Pastrana, they managed to make it into like 4 different career genres out of the X Games from that era.
And that's just something that we don't have now. I mean, freestyle motocross itself, I think, has, in its quest for evolution, has unfortunately sort of devolved into something that I don't particularly enjoy. But, skateboarding is one of those things where the sport has only continued to progress in a way that is really exciting, but we don't have any new famous skateboarders. I mean, do you, like, if I showed you 5 guys, do you think you could pick Nyjah Houston out of a lineup?
Actually, I was going to say the last pro skateboarder that I'm very familiar with is Nyjah Houston.
Okay. So yeah, because he's, he would have even gotten some of that mainstream cable coverage at some point.
Exactly.
But like,
yeah. And especially with his age and like the idea that he was like the star skateboarder at 11, like before, like now how the Olympic skateboarding is dominated by teenagers. Like the fact that he kind of like broke out of that and was like the last like kind of young dynamo to cross over in the vein of like of Stacy Peralta and Tony Hawk,
Yeah, because like you don't know who Jamie Foy is, do you?
Nope, that name does not ring a bell.
And that's crazy because I've seen Jamie Foy do things on a skateboard that are completely revolutionary. And that's a guy who skates in contests and has big sponsors. But that would be the next evolution of that sort of thing, is a guy like Jamie Foy being weirdly famous. But that when X Games stuff comes around, I always go, it's like, oh yeah, I mean, that's of my interest anyways. I like all of those things, but
as a teenager, it was like I grew up at like the height of it.
Yeah,
like it was something that it was such a big deal. But like even I would say the difference between the early 2000s to like your heyday of X Games has been like such a marked decrease as well. Well, when there always was like one action sports athlete that seemed to always kind of cross over, and it stopped at a certain point.
Yeah, I and I think part of that is also, the death of Sports Illustrated and the death of sports writing, and the fact that we don't really have these profiles on guys anymore. Not that, say, there were X Games guys getting big profiles in Sports Illustrated, but there was
a
I think
crossover though.
Yeah, and I just think there was a greater knowledge of like, hey, who's really good at bowling? Or, hey, have you seen this ice skater? Or, hey, there's this one college baseball player that's really special. And that doesn't exist anymore just because there's too many options of things to go around. But I always think about that in the summer where it's like, oh yeah, Dave Mira was like famous for a few weeks every summer. Like, it's just a very strange thing to think about.
I mean, also crossover Dave Mira with the challenge and stuff like that.
And
like
a great video game, Dave Mira Freestyle BMX 2, which I have played probably as much as any video game in my life and greatly influenced my musical taste, with Gangstar and Rage Against the Machine and Sublime all on that soundtrack. Like, as a kid, that was my introduction to Rage. That was my introduction to Gangstar. That was like a very influential video game for me.
Yeah, what's really missing, what we're talking around, is that there has not been like the definitive documentary done about the action sports video game boom, and like how it like really, because you were talking about like those musicians, and then I was in my head going back to like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 and going like, yeah, no, Power Man 5000 and bands like that, like and that's not a great example, Power Man 5000.
No, it's actually a fantastic example, because
but you know what I'm saying about this?
Fucking know 2 or 3 Power Man 5000 songs, and there's no reason that we should know that.
And it's solely because of the school level on Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2.
It's completely. And my first game was 3, and so for me it was like that was my introduction to AFI, and that was my introduction to the one good CKY song. And
95 great Dirty Bings. Yeah, no, the one song that they just squeezed all the juice from. And maybe it is that we just don't have like a new vein of, I don't even know if it's like an action sport game, because like you could easily say like, okay, there's the Tony Hawk remasters that came out, and then there was actually a very, very good kind of inline game that came out a couple of years ago. But it's like there is like the cachet of like that genre, I think, is incredibly pegged to the sport itself, or to the genre of sport itself. And similarly, I remember when there used to be like fun Olympics games. And there's no like fun Olympic video games, because it's now like Mario and Sonic, and you just like smash a button all the time. Like,
yeah, and not to go full Garrett Kidney, I think that's probably a bigger video game issue, where just video games aren't fun in the way that they used to be. Now, I have no interest in an arcade style video game. I primarily play sports games, and I want those sports games to be super realistic. So I know that I'm a part of the problem, but I also know that between the microtransactions and just some of the poor physics or whatever in the game, that it's just, there's a level of joy to say NBA Live 2005 that I'm not sure is met by the current NBA 2K game, even if I like the current NBA 2K game.
Or like I mean, the thing that I think as a sports game thing, and we're going to get into Dragongate, guys.
There's not a ton this week. I've enjoyed this conversation.
There is a bonus secret topic that's in between our stuff that I think some people might find kind of interesting when we get into it. But we're going to talk about sports video games for another 2 minutes here. The one sports video game that I feel like has like the positive just a sentiment about is EA College Football. Like, and I think that is still really working off the 20-year layoff, or not 20 years, 10-year layoff between the titles. Like, you don't have that kind of warmness towards an MLB of the Show. And if you look towards like the more arcadey games, like there was a new Mario Tennis that came out this week, and it's seen as like greatly mediocre by people who like those kinds of games. It's a industry-wide epidemic.
Did you purchase the second college football game, the one from this most recent season?
I did not. Like,
see, neither did I.
Yeah. I put so many hours into 25 that when 26 came about, I was like, you know what? I got kind of like the scratch, that scratch, that itch for me. And like, I'm at the point of my life that, Case, enjoy your mid late 20s, because when you reach like the 30s and 40s, you more portion out your kind of time like that. And that I was just like, I don't feel the need to get that itch for that level of time commitment of 26. And I was just fine not doing it.
No, I mean, with my schedule, and you know how busy I am a lot of the time, I don't really have time to play video games during the week. And so when I was like the last time I was in like a very steady relationship, like when we were living together, like she kind of knew that like, okay, like Friday afternoon, Saturday afternoon, if we're home, that's kind of the time that I would like to play video games for a little bit. But now that I live on my own and I don't really like the apartment that I'm in, I do everything in my power to not be home if I don't have to be. And so like that game came out right when I was moving, and I didn't buy it then, and then a little bit of time went by, and the reviews were good, but it's not like the reviews were anything otherworldly. And then I fired up last year's game, and I was like, well, I still have my Vanderbilt dynasty, and there's no reason to move on from that. I still like the Vanderbilt roster that I have, and then I just never got around to buying it.
Yeah, and I think that we're kind of now seeing with sports games, the idea of an annual sense maybe only works for the shows Madden, and then also 2K, and I'm blanking on what they now call the former FIFA franchise.
I think it's like
EAFC.
EAFC.
Yeah. Those are the only ones that seem to have like the marketplace and the demand to do like the yearly updates, because like F1 decided not to do a new F1 game this year. They're just going to release updates and then add in do like a expansion pack with new drivers, dad and Cadillac and stuff like that. And that seems to be becoming a lot more the case with like the I guess Tiffany brand sports league games.
Yeah, because I'm at a point where I'm pretty much every other year on the show. It's been a few years since I've done Madden, because I remember that it was 2 apartments ago for me. That was the last time that I bought Madden. And I think I played it the weekend that it came out, and then I didn't touch it again. So I'm out on that for a while. And then I normally do 2K every year, but I haven't really, like, I've got the 2K from this year, but I haven't really spent a lot of time with it. But again, that's also a product of me just not being home ever anymore.
Sure.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 soundtrack is Ramones Blitzkrieg Bop, Red Hot Chili Peppers Fight Like a Brave, which is awesome. Rollins Band, What's the Matter, Man, which I don't remember being in that game, but I love Rollins Band. Alien Ant Farm Wish, which
I'm right now just laughing at the Rollins Band thing. Like, if there was ever a VoiceGate Patreon, we would have a big deep dive into our both personal relationships with Henry Rollins. I feel
the thing with Rollins, so like my relationship with Henry Rollins is pretty simple in that I think all of his Black Flag stuff is super overrated, and I think he might be the least interesting Black Flag singer. Now, I really like the record My War, and there, of course, there's iconic stuff with I'm blanked on the name of it, of Damage, the first Black Flag record that he's on with the red and black album cover, and it's like, all right, Rise Above is great, Six Pack is great, TV Party is great, but I think a lot of his Black Flag stuff is really overrated. Like, I don't really care about Slippin' In, I don't really care about Loose Nut, but I think the Rollins Band stuff is incredibly underrated, and that's something that people my age, even like young punk kids who know Black Flag, there's no cultural touchstone to Rollins Band whatsoever. Like, they don't even know, like, nobody my age knows Liar, and I don't like that song because that's like joke Henry Rollins to me, so that doesn't I'm not entertained by that, but the like serious real Rollins Band music I'm super into, but nobody my age knows Rollins Band like whatsoever.
I feel like this would be 2 weeks in a row of Pantera, but like there's a world where you plug in Rollins for Phil and Anselmo, and that band is so much more better. Like his later tendencies much more move towards a groove metal kind of vein.
Oh God, absolutely. Alien Ant Farm Wish, which is a great song, and I always like to remind people that Alien Ant Farm on that one record, like Smooth Criminal is one of those hits that was so big that it was counterproductive to the band, because Wish is a great song and Movies is such a great song, and they're only the Smooth Criminal band. And then there's like Del the Funky Homo Sapien is on this, which is something I was really into for a while. AFI is on this. Adolescence, which is a great LA punk band, they're on this. That one CKY song that everybody knows. And then Body Jar, Not the Same, which is such a great song. And I don't know a single other song that Body Jar has done, but Body Jar, Not the Same is fantastic.
Yeah. I feel like the documentary needs to be with the whoever was the music director for I'm blanking on what the actual production house was. It began
It
with
was what,
it's
Neversoft?
Neversoft. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going Nevermind. No, it wasn't Nevermind. Neversoft. Like, because it was also the same studio that was like parts of it was responsible for Mortal Kombat. Like, it was from like
Interesting.
the splinters of like Acclaim and like that. So, but no, that's where the documentary is. But that's not what y'all are actually probably here to listen to us talk about.
I don't know. I could do. Did you ever play the Skate video game series that was just Skate period?
You know, Skate I was such a Tony Hawk Pro Skater purist that whenever I
Okay.
tried to pick up Skate, it just did not feel good to me.
So
And I just never could get much more than like an hour in before I'd much rather just pull up Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4 even.
So I feel the opposite. Like, Skate to me was such a massive deal because it was kind of promoted as like, hey, this is going to be the more realistic Skate game. And I was right in the wheelhouse of especially Skate 2 and Skate 3 coming out. The amount of hours I have logged on Skate 2 and Skate 3 are, I guess in hindsight, disgusting. But those are, other than that Dave Mirra game, those are the games that I played the most. I just want to hit you with the Skate 1 soundtrack really quick. Agent Orange, No Such Thing, which Agent Orange is maybe the best LA punk band of all time. Bad Brains, Eye Against Eye. Band of Horses, The Funeral. I saw Band of Horses last year. They're still great. Black Flag, Six Pack. Booker T and the MCs, Green Onions. Cheap Trick, Surrender. Devo, Gut Feeling, fantastic. Eric B. and Rakim, Know the Ledge. Gangstar, Now You're Mine. Motorhead, We Are Motorhead. Nirvana, Lounge Act, great cut on Nevermind. NWA, Express Yourself. Rick Ross, Hustlin', that was right when that song came out too. Slayer,
right.
Raining
Shit.
Blood. Ramones are in here. I don't really care for the Sex Pistols, but the Sex Pistols are in here. The White Stripes, Girl, You Have No Faith in Medicine. Oh, God, that is a video game soundtrack right there. They quite
I forgot
literally
that David Bowie on the soundtrack too.
Yeah, Bowie's on here. They quite literally do not make them like this anymore.
Booker T and the MGs. Christ.
Yeah, and then that Cheap Trick song, like, I don't know if you care about Cheap Trick because this might just be a purely Midwestern thing, but they're from Illinois, so like,
right, yeah.
Like, my dad being from Indiana really cared about Cheap Trick growing up, and that was sort of instilled to me. And when you would hear Cheap Trick Surrender on that game coming out of NWA or coming out of Nirvana or something that would be recognized as more contemporary, like, that song, no matter the setting, always jumps out of the speakers. And in that game in particular, it's sort of, you know, it's a very clearly distinct 70s AM radio style rock song. And you're just like, oh my God, I feel so alive right now. This is the greatest. This is the greatest thing ever. This is the greatest song ever. That's what, like, when you hear that in that context, you go, wow, this is really special.
Yeah, and I feel like that game series and really the action game kind of genre was like the driver of that, at least through the 2000s. Like especially for like the deep cuts of like discovering like, oh yeah, no, MC5. Like, I remember MC5 being on one of the games. I was like, what is this band? And
yeah.
It just is something that I think we've kind of lost and without the monoculture in some ways that kind of has happened. But I don't have a good way to transition us.
No, we can go to Dragongate now. All right,
yeah.
they were in Kobe
Rip
Arts
the
Center.
Band-Aid.
Nobody was playing Cheap Trick. Nobody was playing NWAs. You know, it was what it was.
It was what it was. Kobe Arts Center spot. Pretty basic kind of show, though. What we knew going into it was that the Open the Brave Gate #1 contendership would be decided between Genki Horiguchi and Kagatora, and then as well kind of the follow-up for Natural Vibes Chapter 5, as well as we already knew that we would be getting a main event for Marcus Mathers in Kobe, which was kind of a thing to kind of hold on to. And I feel like that those kind of big hit kind of things, considering how Corkin really was a case for me, and I read through your review that you got up this week on Voices of Wrestling, that the further I got away from Corkin, the more I had a better taste in my mouth with it. I thought that there was a lot more kind of contained Gajadokuro-ness on this show that kind of worked for it a little better than this, but I think that still going back to the stuff that we knew about going into this show, coming out of it, the one thing that I feel like that we kind of got was a little bit more of a direction on where some more bigger players ended up being on the Fukuoka show, because we were talking about like, oh, we don't really have a good spot for most of Paradox in the show. Well, now coming out of the Kobe Art Center show, after Yamato put away Gucci with a Galleria. A Triangle Gate 3-way is now happening in Fukuoka, and Genki Horiguchi will be challenging Ryoya Tanaka for the Brave Gate. And I would say that those were kind of the big things coming out of that show. What were your kind of big takeaways?
I guess I want to start with the Brave Gate decision because I'm a little stunned by the Brave Gate decision.
So we have, it was Genki Horiguchi versus Kagatora. Genki got the backslide of heaven fully out of the Ikitozen. He had a kick out of the Guramakakari going into this, but it felt like a match that Kagatora was kind of dominating and really was tearing apart Horiguchi's leg, and Horiguchi just dipped into the well and got a kind of a little bit more of a surprising win here. But I think also if we kind of pull back and like think about Genki Horiguchi, I would say that Fukuoka is like the closest big show to his hometown. So there maybe could have been a little bit of that happening with this result.
I think that's true. You know, I found the Genki versus Kagatora match on this show to be an interesting match. It was a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be. Not that it was a long match, but it was just longer than I thought it was going to be. I was a little stunned at how much Genki was able to kick out of and the amount of hope and fire that they gave Genki in this match. I mean, at one point kicking out of Kagatora's finisher, which I thought was really surprising. It makes the Tanaka match, assuming it happens, because, you know, we're a week out from Uno Dos Tres, and as we're recording this, Dragongate is preparing for their show in Kyoto, and right before we started recording, it was announced that Tanaka's off the show due to poor health. I would assume that he'll be back for Uno Dos Tres. I would certainly hope so, given what this Brave Gate run has become. But I guess on one hand, a Tanaka versus Genki Brave Gate match is really simple. You're going to work a million backslide from heaven spots. I would assume that Tanaka will take the same approach that Kagatora did, which is to work the leg of Genki Horiguchi and to try to immobilize him. And I think your best case scenario is you get this really, really great stretch of near falls towards the end of the match where it looks like that Genki, of all people, could end this guy's title run. But in 2021, when we were coming off of the Speedstar final and Kobe World shows and Genki Horiguchi was the Open the Brave Gate champion, I felt then that despite him being one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, that Genki was probably past the point of needing to hold a title ever again, and I wasn't really interested in seeing him as a Brave Gate champion in any sort of context for any amount of length, and I just can't help but feel like it's the wrong decision because a Kagatora versus Tanaka match not only has a higher floor, but it also has a higher ceiling, and I'm just not sure what beating Genki Horiguchi in a singles match means in 2026.
Yeah, I feel like that. I co-sign with the idea that if we're looking at this as what's the ceiling, what's the floor, Kagatora in 2026 is the safer answer with it. I do kind of. There's a part of me that wonders, like, I really enjoyed Genki's run that they did in King of Gate this year. I thought his match with Yoshioka was incredibly well worked, and I thought that was kind of a hidden highlight of the tournament was that miracle run with him there. And maybe there's a part of me that if we weren't kind of having a question mark about Tanaka's health, I'd be like, all right, so let's see if Tanaka's able to get a better match out of Genki Horiguchi than Yoshioka. And at least for me, that would be kind of interesting a little bit. But yeah, the one thing about having it being a Horiguchi is that I do think that you're kind of setting this up to be kind of a formulaic match in a way. And I do think that we kind of got to see the formula happen with Kagatora a little bit, but maybe it's the idea of how much can Tanaka avoid getting caught with the backslide, and how we've seen Tanaka be kind of inventive about his transitions, and that's at least an interesting thing to watch for in this match, is to see how if it happens as expected, that you get to have I think like Tanaka's been able to like do cross sabers out of anywhere and stuff like this, but to just kind of seeing that interplay. And maybe that's something I'm looking forward to. And maybe that's why I'm a little bit higher. I guess I'm kind of coming down on Genki being here. But I still think you're right that if we're looking at this just as like an on paper, thing, the obvious answer was Kagetora, and they kind of swerved away from that.
Yeah, I certainly see the idea of, hey, isn't it going to be great when Tanaka has all of these great kick out attempts, and that, I mean, look, Genki Horiguchi has 23 years of credibility of that, hey, he could win any match at any point with the backslide from heaven, and you have to be aware of it. And that's just a fatal part of his character. It's understanding Dragongate is understanding that Genki Horiguchi could win a match like this. So I think there's going to be built-in drama there. I just worry that he can't go at the level that Tanaka's going to need him to, and I'm not sure it benefits Tanaka to slow down for Genki Horiguchi, whereas he and Kagetora, I think, would be a really hot match because, Kagetora had a really sneaky great 2025, even if he wasn't in a lot of technically great matches. He was great for that entire year, and I'm just more interested in the idea of Kagetora challenging. I mean, let me look on his cage match real quick. Unless I'm forgetting something, I feel like it's been forever since we've seen a Kagetora Bravegate challenge. I know for a while he was always sort of in the mix, but I associate that with like Takahiro Yamamura era.
Yeah, and maybe it is kind of a thing that he was so much around the division that maybe in the Hyo and Dragon Dia era that we're still kind of coming out of, that he was a little bit more of someone who would go in and get a challenge maybe once every other year, and that was kind of the position there. But I can't remember. It would be beating Genki Horiguchi after a Speedstar final for me to remember, like, when he was Bravegate champion. I think that was around the time of his last run.
So Kage in 2020 at Final Gate lost a Bravegate match to Keisuke Ikuda. In 2021 at Speedstar Final, he beat Genki for the title, and then they did that gimmick where they vacated the belt in Osaka, and then SB Kento beat Kagetora for the vacant Bravegate belt in Nagoya. And I remember being very into all of that. That was a cool angle they did. Kento felt hot, Kagetora felt hot. That match in Nagoya felt really hot. And then the only time he's challenged since then, and I have zero recollection of this, was Gate of Bayside 2024 when he lost to Hyo in 9 minutes. And I could not tell you anything about that match.
I do vaguely remember that happening.
Let me see what I reviewed the show. Let me
because
see.
That would have been like also Gate of Bayside. You had in 2024, right? Not 2025.
Yeah, 2024. So this is the year with Shun and Monte, and then that awesome Twin Gate match, Alejandro and Kiyomiya versus Jason and Jackie.
Yeah, I remember this being third because there was also like the SMJ and Kai thing happening about being like the king of Yokohama.
Yeah. I credit where credit's due. I gave this match 3 3/4 stars at the time, but God, I have no memory of it.
That is kind of the Kagetora special in Bravegate. It's 3 3/4, and you only remember it 5 years later when we're doing a podcast, and the next time he has a Bravegate match.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote quite a bit about this too. I have no recollection of this match. I put over Hyo like crazy at it now that I'm reading it, but this is, I guess, when Hyo really started to turn the corner as a wrestler. But no, I don't remember this match whatsoever. And for Genki, I guess just for the sake of the exercise, let me see. It had to have been 2021. That had to have been the last time that he was in the Bravegate scene. So this was.
He didn't have a challenge like randomly.
Oh, so his last 5, we'll go through this, or his last 4, we'll go through this in the same way. 2020, he lost to Kaito Ishida.
Yeah.
And I vaguely remember that. And then 2021 this was at Kobe World, he beat Akuda. The next day, Kagetora beat him. And then he and Hyo wrestled for the Bravegate at Final Gate 2013. So the defense right before the Kagetora match.
Yeah, that's why I thought that he had like a random one on a big show. Yeah.
Now, I have purposefully blocked out Final Gate 2023 because I was not a fan of the booking of that show. But let me see. That's why my review was largely based around Monte, and it's labeled as such, and not Final Gate 2023. Let me see real quick if this will load, and if if I can see what star rating I gave this. I can't imagine I was very high on a 2023 Hyo versus 2023 Genki Horiguchi match. As voicesofwrestling.com, how embarrassing. Voicesofwrestling.com continues to fail me. It's not loading as quickly as I wanted to. Here we go. This is a really long write-up on Monte, and then, oh, okay, here it is. I gave it 3.25. That sounds about right.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the more interesting match is Kagetora, and that pains me to say as somebody that's always been a fan of Genki Horiguchi, but I was extremely surprised by the result of that match. I liked the way that it was worked. I thought it was a competent match. I just assumed that it was a vehicle to get Kagetora, almost to have Kagetora replace Genki in this veteran role, and then they kept Genki in that role instead.
Yeah, and I think that just kind of has to go to Kunamoto being close to Fukuoka and that kind of thing for that. Elsewhere on the show, let's talk about Natural Vibes versus Paradox and Ultimo. It was the whole complement of Natural Vibes. KZ, Strong Machine, J, UT, who was hurt in this match and has been pulled from shows, as well as Gyuchi and Aki versus Yamato, Dragongate, Susumu, Hulk, and Ultimo. And this has been something that we've been ready for Daiki Yanigiuchi to kind of have like the step coming out of this, giving like his kind of big time performances that he's had in 2025. And boy, he feels like that he should have been in Natural Vibes from the start and should just always be in Natural Vibes for until he taps into the darker urges and does the heel turn. But for like the next like 2 to 3 years, this is a place where he always should have been in, and it just felt that way, especially with the work he was having up against Yamato in this match. And I thought this was a better performance from Aki after the goose egg at the main event in Corkin for him as well.
Let's start with Aki, and then we'll go to Yanagiuchi. You're exactly right. This was a very strong outing from the artist formerly known as Akihiro Sahara. He needed, again, I left Corkin not really worried about him, but certainly aware that he didn't exactly crush it. It was nice to see him on this show in some very, very much prolonged in-ring time, look as good as he did, and look as comfortable as he did. If you go back and compare his body language on this show to the body language on the Corkin show, that was a guy who was actively physically nervous in Corkin Hall. And here he looked much more comfortable. It looked like he shook the rust off a little bit. I'll be curious to see when he's put back in a big spot in Fukuoka how he looks, but this was the sort of calming, landing the plane type performance that he really needed coming out of Corkin.
Yeah, and then being in a position where you're pulling at least the guys who did that, and I think a lot of it really was Yamato in this match, his interactions with him, kind of making him kind of toughen up and serious a little bit with it, and kind of in that way kind of get him back on course. Having him in the Triangle Gate match, now that being a 3-way between Love and Peace, Natural Vibes, and Paradox, it definitely feels like that it's taking a step back and going like, was this the plan kind of all along? I don't know if that was the case here, but looking in how we were talking about this last week, just like, okay, what are you doing with these kind of people? Are they going for the Twin Gate, I guess? Like, it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it felt stable from him. And there is a little bit of that. I think that he has to find also a balance between kind of being the lovable football playing dinosaur and then being kind of a monster. And maybe it was a little bit of watching a young monster in performance and some stuff that we'll get into later on that they had that a little bit front of mind while watching this. But I came away maybe not completely where I want him to be at, but the path's there, and I think the path goes to a strong performance in Fukuoka, and then we're just kind of putting that Corkin just behind us and not bringing it up again.
Well, you made the point last week, and I think it was a really important point to make, that it's been, I don't know if issue is the right word, but throughout the course of this company's history, really going back 25 years or so, there is a certain type of treatment that guys with Sahara's body receive. And in the last 10 years or so, just to narrow that time frame, the example that we have is Shimizu. And I know that over the course of the last decade, you and I have both been like, man, there are some times where I just wish that either Shimizu would take himself more seriously or that the company would take Shimizu more seriously. Doesn't it just, we start to apply American wrestling logic to this company that normally does anything but, and it's like, well, he's just this big guy. Can't he just be this big guy? Why does he have to turn into this oaf at times? And I think Sahara is going to be the same thing. And I think, as we get into this podcast and get to our final topic, I'm going to want to put a pin in Yamato's performance in this match because I want to tie it into something we're going to talk about later. But I also think as we talk about a certain era of Big R Shimizu or Big Boss Shimizu, I'm having a hard time seeing Sahara buck that trend. I think there are going to be times where he's taken really seriously as a babyface. I think there's times where he's going to be taken really seriously as a heel. But I think more often than not, babyface or heel, there's going to be an element of him that is always going to be played for comedy, and that is just how historically this promotion has done things.
Yeah, and it's something that, at least for me, like when we were doing that discussion, it was just something that just kind of snapped to me, and while we were discussing it last week, it made me go like, oh yeah, no, thinking about CyberKong, thinking about even the treatment about Tozawa, and it just was one of those things. But we'll talk a little bit more about that there. Let's get back to Daiki, because Gucci as he's now being called, he just feels like a natural in a way that he led off the match. And the total like sequence going into him just doing a feint pose instead of the Gyuchi rocket just was like, oh, this is a guy who feels like he's been doing this particular variation of his act his entire career, and he's only been doing it for 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks, and he feels polished, and it feels kind of remarkable because it feels like that there was a level of trust, especially in the closing stretch, that they gave Gucci the big time spot, and I thought he knocked it out of the park with Yamato in the closing stretch.
Yeah, this is what I have been saying for the last year, is that I feel like he's been ready for this level of elevation, and I was really surprised that immediately following the Bravegate match with Yamato, which was last April, so that was already 10 months ago, that they didn't elevate him to the level that he's at now. He dropped the Cork and character gimmick, but he didn't really go anywhere after that. And I thought that was such a puzzling decision because to me, the Yamato match was the clear and obvious, like, oh, this is a guy. Like, this is a guy who can hang on this roster with the high-end guys and the mid-card guys that he works these opening matches with. Like, this is just a guy who should be getting more opportunities. And while I don't want to cast such harsh judgment on Aki at this point in time, I don't even mean this as a dig on him, but we've seen 2 matches, and the difference in ability and the difference in confidence, the difference in presentation, Natural Vibes, this era of this unit, I think is going to be one that could very easily be defined by Gucci. And I'm not seeing a scenario in which it would be easily defined by Aki. I think this unit this time around is going to do for Gucci what it did to KZ in 2018 and what it did to Kame in 2022 and what it has recently done to Strong Machine J with the figurehead leadership position. This is not a unit that he's taking over, to be clear, but I think there are times throughout this unit's history where one guy has really led the charge in Natural Vibes. And through 2 matches, I am just so incredibly bullish on this guy and his potential.
Yeah, it just feels like he's been a part of this and has been doing this for years. Like, if you would take someone who has taken years away from watching a Dragongate show and you go like, okay, this is Natural Vibes right now, this is the current iteration of Natural Vibes, the person's going to go like, how long has this Gucci guy been around? Has he always been this good? Like, he comes off like someone who's been doing it for 4 or 5 years, and it's very, and I know it's not like him being like the captain or anything like this, but it feels like that they kind of tailored the Jackie Kame playbook with him, and they found a guy that could just take that idea and expand on it and really kind of make it his own. And we've already kind of seen that, and it just like, it's instantly the most interesting thing about any Natural Vibes match he's a part of is going to be Gucci and into the ongoing future. Still don't think it makes their chances of winning the Triangle Gate any much better coming out of this, but I still...
No, and I don't think they should either.
No, but I still think like this was given how things ended in Cork, and this is exactly what you wanted to see here.
I think to compare him to those names again, for as flawed as I found the first incarnation of Vibes to be, just because of some of the dead weight in that unit, it was one of those things where it was initially very clear that this was KZ's unit and that KZ fit into the mold they were trying to put him into. And as this unit progressed, I think we saw that with UT, where rather immediately we were like, oh yeah, this is a good fit for him. This is going to be good for him. And the same thing happened with Kame, where we were a little bit confused about the name at first. Maybe we were a little bit confused about the gear at first, but it was like, no, this is the right thing for Kame to be doing right now. And we saw when Strong Machine J joined Natural Vibes, just the difference in presentation. And I made this point in 2022 a lot, where I was like, we're witnessing a guy gain confidence in real time. The Strong Machine J that, I mean, God, you and I in 2020 and 2021, we would talk about, whether or not Strong Machine J was going to retire because he couldn't stay healthy. And you and I would have these very long conversations about like, okay, put him in a unit. Where does he fit? What is this character? What's his short term? What's his long term? Like, what are they doing with him? And then we learned that he could breakdance, and all of a sudden it made more sense. And now with Gyuchi, again, this was my plea was last year. I was like, I think he could be in Love and Peace. I think he could be a young guy in Paradox. I think you could put him anywhere and he would succeed. I made the pitch last year that I thought they should have turned him heel, and I think at some point he's going to be a really interesting heel. But he's been ready for this for a year now. And so it's really nice to see those training wheels finally off of this guy, because through 2 matches with Natural Vibes, he has passed with such flying colors. It is remarkable how good he's been.
And I think with Yanagiuchi and with Natural Vibes, that's definitely going to be a big point of interest as we move towards Uno Dos Tres, and to see how this momentum kind of continues with these guys in their next chapter. And as we look to Fukuoka, it's probably worth like next going on to and talking about the main event from Kobe Arts Center. It was a trios match. D-Courage, Yuki Yoshioka, Dragon Daria, and Marcus Mathers versus Gajadokuro, Madoka Kakuta, Kai, and Kota Minoura. Yoshioka caught the win in the final moments as he catches Kota Minoura and the reversal Samson hold, a move that I remember him had, like as soon as he hit it, I was like, oh yeah, no, that was his flashman. Okay, yeah. After taking Kakuta out on the outside with a stuffed pile drivers on the chairs, Yoshioka gets the win over Gajadokuro in the main event here. And it really kind of felt like that they wanted to have us kind of be reminded a bit about the Dreamgate build. Yoshioka taped up to all hell and doing a lot of kind of selling throughout the match here. But when you get to the final kind of moments, we do not see Yoshioka in ring take out Kakuta. Instead, he kind of sticks to Kakuta's level of tactics and goes for a pile driver on the outside here. But interesting kind of build with this. I really liked the match itself. I thought Mathers in this main event continues to look really strong and comfortable in these kind of positions, and a good, like, after the long heat on Yoshioka, I thought the hot tag from Dia and Mathers was really, really strong there, and that was kind of the highlight of the main event for me, at least.
Well, the reshuffled Kyoto card certainly steals my thunder of mentioning that as I was looking to see what was left for Uno Dos Tres and realizing that we needed a King of Gate, or not a King of Gate, but a Twin Gate match, rather, that you still had your Twin Gate champions out of the open, and you've got Tanaka busy, and you've got Yoshioka busy, and I was like, oh, they're going to do Dia and Mathers as a Twin Gate team, which I still think they're going to do, but now it feels a little bit more obvious because they've turned that Kyoto main event into a 4-way tag with those guys teaming. I was delighted at the way that Mathers fit in here. You and I have talked about how we've seen him in some undercard settings, in some undercard tag settings, look very comfortable. We thought he looked very comfortable against Monte and Cork and Hall, but this is the first time on TV that we've seen him in a big D-Courage multi-man match, and this was one with a lot going on, a lot of intricate storytelling stuff between Yoshioka and Kakuta that he was at times adjacent to and at times directly involved in, and I thought he looked good in all of that. I'm continuously impressed by how comfortable he looks. This is a guy who, again, like, I don't know what his plans are and I don't know really what is there for him in North America right now. And so I know that there's, you got to pay your bills, and I'm sure that this Dragongate tour is not making him a rich man by any means, but I just look at him and I'm like, God, can't he just hang out until Kobe World and then take a break and then come back? Like, he should be on this roster for a little bit, because he's going to get so good if he continues to work with these guys, because he came in with a great base, and I think he's assimilated himself incredibly well.
Yeah, it's just something where even in that we're at like week 3 or week 4 of his tour, really, he's developing the chemistry within the guys that really kind of comes from all of the touring outside of the taped shows. And that's kind of the benefits of taking on this kind of schedule. And even in this match this match, he was the 6th most important person in this match, like being clear of like what his station is here. I mean, Tanaka won the Royal Sambo and had a fun sequence with Kimura in doing so, and that kind of opened up that slot here for him in this main event. And this was not like a showcase for him. This was very much the Yoshioka and Kakuta heat show, a bunch of crowd brawls, and in that kind of situation, like that's it. If that's not like, you're not used to that kind of style of this is what the main event is, you could look very much out to lunch and you could stick out like a sore thumb. And I think one of the biggest compliments to give Mathers at this point is that he is in a Dragongate main event in his 3rd week of touring with him, or 3rd or 4th week, and he looks great. And he looks like someone that really, as we're kind of getting to a point where we should start anticipating Rey de Parejas happening, that we're kind of at a position where it's like, oh, Mathers also makes it so that you could do like Dia and Mathers and Tanaka and Yoshioka and have 2 D-Courage teams, and that would be great. And I would really hope to see that. So yeah, I want him to stick around as long as he can.
I'm with you there. I've really enjoyed the work that he's done. As for the Dreamgate build, which I had so many issues with the last time that we talked, I think it would have been nice for them to have run this match in Korakuen. And I still don't think that would have solved all or most of the issues that I've had with this build, but it's just, I think historically, I think it's fair to say that we use Korakuen as the big table setter for these big shows, especially with it when you're within a month of these big shows. And I'm just not sure what Yoshioka looking strong and making this valiant comeback in a house lights on Kobe Art Center building does for anybody. It's sort of A for effort, but it didn't get me more excited about this match. I see what they're doing, but I'm unimpressed by it.
Yeah, Yuki Yoshioka has a singles match that has not changed with the Kyoto card. So if you're looking at the last TV before Uno Dos Tres, he has a singles match against Kai, and that's apparently what they're sticking with here. So this was intended to be the last face-to-face, and it will be the at least last televised in-ring action between the two going into it. I was kind of, I guess the one bit of his like carryover self from that pile driver last week was that instead of Terminator Yoshioka, what we got was the Yoshioka who just sells like death and is able to make the hot tag, and then at the right moment when everything is kind of isolated, was able to get the win and get out of there before Kakuta was able to get back to his feet. Kakuta took about like a few minutes and was into the end of the show promos before he got to his feet after the pile driver on the outside.
Yeah, it's just not doing it for me. Do you think Yoshioka versus Kai happening 4th on a Kyoto show is the
Angle?
Angle, yes, but I want that as a drop of you going Angle. That's fun. I like that.
It's a 6-match show, buddy. That's the pre-intermission match. If they aren't on if this match goes longer than 6 minutes and it isn't a DQ, I'm going to be stunned, and then everything happening after the match will be twice the length of it.
Angle. Oh, that's funny. I like that. What I was gonna say was, do you think
just what you need on VoiceGate is a soundboard where you can just
that's right. I'm going to implement all the ones from the Morning Zoo show, which luckily we're not that drop heavy of a show. We sort of make a point, not to get into my shoot job that nobody gives a shit about, but it's like our goal is to sound like a morning radio show that doesn't sound like a morning radio show. And
right.
Yeah. There's none of that. There's not. Okay. So truthfully, should I tell this? I'll get into it real quick. Like 2 weeks ago, we were doing a dumb radio story about the state of Rhode Island had been offering Mr. Potato Head license plates, but Hasbro, who owns Mr. Potato Head, is moving to Massachusetts, and so Rhode Island is getting rid of their Mr. Potato Head license plates. And we started talking about all the different, like, there's so many great potatoes. And I jokingly said, we'll give you your Mount Rushmore potatoes. And Mike, when I tell you that we spent no less than 3 hours on air on that show talking about the Mount Rushmore potatoes and all the different types of potatoes, the amount of people I've heard from that listen to the show that have been like, hey, I'm 40 years old. I have never downloaded a podcast before, but I had to get to work halfway through the Mount Rushmore potatoes conversation. I downloaded your guys' podcast just to hear the end of that. Has been perhaps the greatest professional achievement that I've had in my life. And it's just, again, I'm very self-aware about what I do, and I'm trying to make it not that as much as I can. And I felt like the potato conversation was a real win and a real, like, oh man, there's like all these hack morning shows aren't doing it the way that we just did that. Now, to you listening, you might go, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I can't believe you get paid money to do that. I can't believe it either, but it fucking worked. People love the potato conversation.
Hey,
anyway, I don't know where we're going. I don't need a drop machine for this show. But my question to you was going to be, before I had a weird ramble about my personal life, was is Yoshioka versus Kai the least impactful former Kobe World main event rematch in the history of this promotion?
Oh man, we're talking about 2026. If you were going to run it back,
just throughout history, think of all the Hulk Shingo in 2008. Well, anytime they wrestled, it was a big deal. Mochizuki Hulk. Okay, well, that was a really big deal. 2010 was Yamato Yoshino. Anytime they wrestled, it was a really big deal. Like, you just go down the list of...
It would be like CIMA Magnitude Kishawada having a random singles match like 2011.
Yeah, and I don't think after
I don't think that happened.
I don't think they ever had a singles match.
But I think that's probably the closest connection, But yeah, no, this is... And I think that just kind of tells you where Kai is in his career, to be honest. Like, I wonder if he's kind of now in that Hulk role where, like, we know him as, like, oh, yeah, it's Kai. He's former Dreamgate champion, X, Y, and Z. And that's kind of the footnote you know him as, at least in the Dragongate context.
Well, I also just think that's a match, that Kobe World match, that has very little historical significance whatsoever. And I think if you asked even the people that participated in the Dragongate channel on the Discord, hey, what was the main event for the Ultimo 35th anniversary show? I don't think a lot of people are landing on, or I guess that was the first night. So Kobe World 2022 night 1. I don't think a lot of people are going instant recall. Oh, it was that Yoshioka versus Kai match that was actually pretty good.
Yeah. God, Yoshioka in 2022. Great wrestler.
Oh man, that was such an awful run of shows. Just I don't know in the history of wrestling if I've ever seen an angle die a death quite like the Coach Minoura Dreamgate invasion angle at that July Korakuen show. Just an immediate gut feeling of, oh, this is going to be bad. This is going to be really bad. And then they made bad decisions on top of it.
No, it's like the impossible question coming out of this. Like, the real trivia question is ask people, list the 4 people that were in the Dreamgate picture of July of 2022, because they might get Yoshioka Minoura, but they sure as fuck aren't going to get Shuji Kondo.
Yeah, and like that's the point with that Kai run. That's weird. That, like, I don't know if people. It's not that people forget. I just don't. I don't think they think of it as, It
has no historical purchase in a way. Yeah.
But it's a reign that I like because, they set him off on a bad path with the Takashi Yoshida defense as V1. And that was just a disaster. But after that, Kai has the Champion Gate match against Shimizu, which is excellent. And then he has the Susumu match, which is like a top 10 Dreamgate match ever. And the problem is that the Kondo match ends in a no contest. If that Kondo match goes to a finish and then they do whatever with Minoura afterwards,
it was like a 4.5 star match.
That's the thing. That's a notebook match. It was on track to be like a high level notebook match. And then it ended the way that it ended. So because of that reign ended with such a whimper. But that had the possibility at the very least of sort of being an above average Dreamgate reign. And then it absolutely did not happen because it's remembered, if anything, for, as we've dubbed it, the Coach Minoura debacle, which I love when people reference that to me and they refer to it as the Coach Minoura debacle. That makes it very, very, that like warms my heart. But yeah,
I feel the same way about the Gentleman's 3. I get it.
Oh, absolutely. No, you have earned all the trademarks on that one. Well done by you on Gentleman's 3. Coach Minoura debacle is mine, and I love when people call it that.
The one that I'm still trying to argue for is the 5% better. That's the one.
Yeah,
that's the one that I really should have got royalties on.
Yeah, unfortunately, you nailed that. That's one of those where unfortunately you were so correct about, and I wish you wouldn't have been.
Yeah, neither do I. Other noteworthy things on this Kobe show. The undercard was fun, if not just kind of kept everything moving. If you're someone who is a big follower of the Sugihara training systems and Jiro Shimbashi like I am, I liked how the Luis Monte match was entirely based around Luis Monte calling his business cards cheap. That's what Furui means, that he was shouting that his business cards was cheap. But on the undercard, the other thing was Big Boss Shimizu and Shiki Kato versus Shun Mari, Shun Skywalker, and Hamare of Saipatra. A double count out, but here this was a double count out after 3 crowd brawls, and in the last crowd brawl there was absolutely no attempt by either of the 4 men to get into the ring. It, at least for me, going into Fukuoka, I know that you are well cemented and respectfully so in your position about this match. I feel a little better about the all-out war coming out of it, at least the way that this built to it versus the Korakuen angle.
I like the idea of the Gajadokuro versus Saipatra stuff. My issue with the all-out war is the Team 2000X involvement. And so,
entirely fair.
Yeah, this was fine for what it was. It was a good brawl. It felt heated. All of their stuff feels really heated. I go back to the Champion Gate shows in November, or the Gate of Destiny double shot. All of that stuff felt really important and really heated, and it had just a nice level of oomph to it. But no, my issue is that they're getting in bed with, I think, the worst thing in Japanese wrestling now that Evil is no longer associated with New Japan. So that's what I don't like about it.
No, that's fair. Well, was there anything else on the Kobe Art Center show you wanted to talk about? We did get Kazuma Kimura finally going deep in a Royal Sambo, making the final against Ryoya Tanaka and having a hot little 2-minute stretch towards the end of that.
Stole my thunder on that. That's what I was going to say was that I really enjoyed Kimura and Ishin kicking off the Royal Sambo. I'm really burnt out on these Royal Sambos. I don't want to watch any of them, but I really liked the way this started with the Kimura Ishin stuff. And I thought Kimura once again looked really good.
Yeah, the only other thing of note is that they did the full Love and Peace entrance in the middle of it. It's no who can stop the Ichikawa. But that was Kobe Art Center. They will be back on the network probably by the time that y'all listen to this tomorrow. I'm just going to run through that card real quick before we move on to other topics. This is, again, a changed card due to Ryoya Tanaka being pulled because of ill health. And this is also since the Kobe show that UT has been pulled as well. We open up with Paradox versus Unaffiliated, BB Hulk, Asumi Yokosuka, and Naruki Doi. Naruki Doi is doing this KBS show versus doing Fukuoka. But they're going up against Genki Horiguchi, Azushi Kanda, Luis Monte. Match 2, Ultimo and Masaki Mochizuki versus Strong Machine J and Aki. Match 3, Shun Mare versus Shimizu Minoura. Match 4 is that aforementioned Yuki Yoshioka versus Kai Engel match. Match 5, after intermission, Love and Peace versus Gajadokuro, Kamei, Rita, and Mochizuki Jr. versus Kakuta, Ishin, and Kato. And your main event, your 2026 Kyoto Special Fittable Award 4-way tag match. It is Hyo and Benkei of Love and Peace versus Yamato and Dragon Kid versus KZ and Gyuchi versus Dragon Dia and Marcus Mathers.
I think it's a fun looking show. I'm really excited for that main event.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that we get Dia and Marcus challenging Jackie Rita coming out of it. But interesting pairings. I mean, you have a Strong Machine J and Aki as a tag team down below, and I think that that's at least a kind of an interesting kind of position. At least you have Mochizuki against him. That I think again is a position of comfort for Aki.
I would agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Case, our next topic is kind of a little bit of a secret one that we are springing on the listeners. So, uh, as of December of 2025, Shima has no longer been under contract with Glade. He is a full freelancer. He is recovering from his shoulder injury. And one of the things that he has done is started a note blog. Note is just another form of a like Gaura blog, Spora blog. The one big difference about these notes is that you have the opportunity as a creator to make some of them paywalled and charge per entry if you want to see an entry. And Shima this week has started putting behind a paywall a series of blogs, and there's only been 2 so far. And the long and short of it, Case, is that I managed to buy these and I have them translated, and they're kind of illuminating, I would say, but they're not super long. I mean, I made a joke on Blue Sky that it's a sign that he's doing this, but who's the real Mark? I'm the one that paid essentially $10 for the right to kind of confirm things that I already kind of knew. But Shima talks about the events leading up to the Dragongate OWE split, and it's kind of like the first time that we have gotten anything from that side, at least for me, as it relates to this kind of split, especially since this is like the first thing I've really seen from that side talking about this after OWE kind of went away 6 years ago.
It's certainly the most direct we've ever seen from that side. I mean, you can go back to the summer of 2024 with the Yamato and T-Hawk bickering on social media, and we broke that down very in depth at the time. That would have been an episode from either late July or early August of 2024, because we had one of our mutual friends really dive into the T-Hawk blog and translate some of that stuff for us to a super high level. And then they also broke down the Yamato promo for us, and we started to draw connections there. But that was, that was a verbal level of subtweeting. The Shima stuff is very direct. And by all means, Mike, you have the floor to sort of illustrate what we've heard from Shima so far on this.
Yeah, so we have 2 articles combined. They're essentially like 2,000 words, but in a way that I think we've kind of seen writing, and especially when people kind of get introspective about this kind of thing. Shima's very introspective about the conclusion of his time in Dragongate, at least if we take Shima at his word, and he talks pretty openly about, hey, this is everything that I experience. I'm not trying to drag anyone down or expose anyone, but what I'm doing is what this is from kind of my perspective. And the one thing that I'll say for me was that as this story was kind of happening 8 years ago, and it was kind of breaking kind of around us in a lot of ways, as we've got away from it and as we learned more and more about the events that have led up to this fissure that is still not healing. It's not healing coming out of these blog entries, but we knew that there was a time that essentially there was a huge kind of cultural power struggle, as well as it also relates to kind of company kind of control power struggle. And Shima openly kind of mentions like a direct date of February 23rd, 2018, when he is sat down by 7 people in and around Dragongate. He says it was 5 wrestlers and 2 staff members, and essentially he doesn't outright say what that was and what they did, but they basically gave him a thing of, you're either going to be with us right now as we do this, or you're not. And Shima basically says, do I have to make this decision right now? And he is forced to, and he says, if I have to make this decision right now without like talking to someone, and what this clearly kind of feels like was like the removal of Takashi Okamura as Dragongate power, essentially. And he was like, since I can't really talk to them about it, then I am not going to go along with you on that. And that was what he talks about in these kind of in these blogs. And then, at least for me, it just kind of confirms the other side of the story and everything that kind of has come out in the years since. At least that's kind of the way I take it.
Yeah, in terms of the timeline stuff, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, CIMA talking about how he took a trip to Mexico in early 2020, which we knew, and you know, we've heard
2018.
2018. Yes, you're right. Sorry, he almost moved to Mexico in 2020. No, this was 2018, and we had heard this throughout the years, and CIMA confirms it in the writing himself that he was really energized by what he was seeing in Mexico, and that he wanted to get back to their Mexican roots. And then he came back to Japan and was blindsided by a certain conversation that they had had. And, in the second update of his writing, he talks about, having a lot of regret for the way that he handled his final days in Dragongate, and that for that last tour that he was on, he was getting dressed alone. He was in the locker room alone. The only people that he was really conversing with were the foreign wrestlers that were on that tour. And then I would assume to some point T-Hawk and Lindemann. But, by the time that he was out in May of 2018, he had spent the last 2 or 3 months really isolating himself from the rest of that roster.
Well, he was in Shanghai for most of it.
Essentially,
Essentially,
right.
essentially CIMA leaves after Memorial Gate. He comes back for like 2 days in May and is gone. And essentially what he says is he was just, all the people he talked to were the people that we were aware of. Kind of, some of them were completely on his side, as we saw with Wentz and Xavier joining up with Strong Hearts and doing Strong Hearts kind of related thing afterwards. But you also had, on the other hand, Flamita, who ends up being back into the fold and a full member of the family in good standing. And the big thing that you kind of see about this, at least from CIMA, is just his big sense of regret in the second one that he talks about this. And I'll just read from this translation towards the end. He talks about like his sense of justice and what he thought was like kind of right and wrong in his position made him essentially isolate himself. And he ends it kind of going like, in any case, I caused a confusion for a great many people. Everything was a result of my own choices. Even if there was CIMA's own sense of justice behind them, the fact is the fans were kept up on it. Doesn't change. Even now, 8 years later, I deeply reflect on that. Once again, I offer my sincere apologies. Everything written above is the course that led me to lead to Dragongate. And if you wonder why I remember like the exact dates, because he always knew that he wanted to kind of write about this and write about how his attitude towards wrestling in the future kind of went forward. And I think very pointedly, he very formally says, to close out this section, I sincerely hope that Dragongate, my home promotion, will continue to cultivate new fans in every era and keeps growing stronger. And very pointed that he ends that way.
Yeah, and as I told Mike earlier today, I go, this is a guy who seems to be doing this and seems to be at some point in life where he is looking to land the plane and do a retirement show in Dragongate. That is how that reads to me. And until I see writing from CIMA that says otherwise, I think that's the takeaway to have here, is that he is doing this almost as this public
mea culpa.
Yeah, I mean, it's this public apology tour that is, again, it's pretty shockingly direct at times, given the way that this relationship has been this Cold War. And you had the sniping between Yamato and T-Hawk 2 years ago. But this is a guy, who I think is looking up at the cross and going, my days are numbered and I need to make things right with the Lord. And the Lord in this case is Dragongate. And it's very interesting to see. And, as we're going to talk about CIMA again here and the last topic that we have, just as a fan of professional wrestling and as a fan of CIMA and as somebody who, I still think is to some degree treated unfairly in his post Dragongate career. I don't always love this idea that he's a punchline. I'm not sure that's always entirely warranted. And luckily, him getting into the Hall of Fame changed that a little bit, but I don't like the way in which CIMA is spoken about sometimes. And I know that, if the guy's knees have one more match in them and only one more match, I would like for it to be in a Dragongate ring.
Yeah, I'm of two minds of this. And I think that there will be people that kind of listen to us say this, and it will solidify some points that the company hasn't been in a bad place without him. And this is the only way that Dragongate gets back to where it was, at least in their minds, before the split happened. And I do think that that is the like a central question that I don't know within the locker room and I don't know within the company is it something where like everything that's written here, there's a part of me that takes it with a level of grain of salt, and there's a part of me that does think like the way that you're kind of thinking, that he's realizing what has been kind of apparent for the last like 3 years for him, that really he's in a situation where it's kind of funny. Like we've also kind of like privately talked about an Ultimo Dragon interview where Ultimo says like outright, yeah, I only have like a couple more years left, and when I retire, it's going to be here in Mexico and not in Japan. Like, it gets interesting. You kind of have these two kind of things happening at the same time, but I guess like there is a bit of me that there is the putting that's being able to like heal these wounds and being able to see like that how much how good I think it was spiritually for people in the company to kind of patch over and have like a new history with Ultimo Dragon, how important that was in 2019. I do see why there would be like a desire to kind of do this towards CIMA. I do kind of wonder though that CIMA kind of coming in for one night and having his fingerprints and involvement. Well, one of the things about this kind of story case and one of the things about this situation is that the people on the sides kind of has stayed the same. I think it's fair to say, and the people that are much more negative about CIMA in general are still very much in that locker room, if not in seats of power within that locker room. So the question ends up becoming for them, is it worth forsaking the last 8 years of independence and improvement of company cultural for one guy to draw one big house and all that baggage that comes with that?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, it's a fascinating
I don't know
situation.
either. Like I've been kind of thinking this out in my head for the last essentially 12 hours since I was able to get access to these.
Yeah, it's just I can't think of another situation. I mean, I guess Cody and AEW is the closest thing we have to it, but the
More
CIMA
punk AEW. Like, let's be honest.
Yeah, you're right. It's probably more punk AEW. You're right, and so it does have an element of hell freezing over if she was to come back, and it might be. I guess my perspective on it is that I expect nothing in the immediate future. I mean, this is the type of thing that I still think is a ways away from happening, if it ever does happen. But to have this level of directness, and again, just from reading the translations that have been prescribed to us, it does seem like a man who is, laying on the hospital bed of his career, and he's hearing the beeping of the heart monitor, and I think he's starting to stare down the barrel of some things that he's got to confront, and that I think he wants to make right. And again, just as a fan of him as a wrestler, it's like, it's like, I don't know, nothing would suck more than the CIMA Produce retirement show where the main event is CIMA, T-Hawk, and Lindemann against Andy
Gamma.
Wu. Yeah, Andy Wu, Gamma, and Magnitude Kishiwada. Like, I don't want to see that. That's not. This is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. And it's not hyperbolic because we're about to review a CIMA match where my big takeaway from it was, hey, you know who the best fucking wrestler in that match was by a mile? It was CIMA. He was unbelievable. But, this is a guy who I think it's very interesting to watch him go through this publicly. So if there's updates in the CIMA writing, we'll continue to update on them because you and I are both pretty intrigued by what's going on here.
Yeah, I do kind of count this as my Strong Hearts life debt kind of thing, the same way as Glade.
I'm with you, man. I took a break from Glade when they were behind the paywall, but now like.
Oh, are you ready for Glade tomorrow, buddy? Main event: El Lindemann versus Shaman Ryuichi Kawakami for the G-Rex title, baby.
Let me.
I think they're taking the belt off Linda.
Oh yeah, why would they do something that I like? Let me see if I can pull up that card real
I'm
quick.
gonna
'Cause
send you the.
right before
I
we started
got you.
recording, you mentioned the card, but I have not seen it. So
I just
this
dropped it
is
in there. But
okay.
and it's also worth noting that while we're still kind of on this topic, like CIMA is not like this is not like the only thing CIMA is doing right now. Like he's done a lot of more towards Instagram and TikTok, like his rehab thing. He's done some training where I forget who it was, like in the Osaka area, that they were like, oh yeah, no, Shima came out and did training. And it's funny that you mentioned those names, Case, because the one thing that I do know that Shima, and we're talking about promoting things, he has on Valentine's Day a kind of public fan club talk show that sold out with him and Magnitude Tokyo or Magnum Tokyo, and then in a few weeks back in Osaka, it's him, it's Gamma, it's Magnitude Kishiwada, and it's Shigehiro Irie. So maybe what we need to do is get Alan out there in Osaka because he would love to hear some Irie tales as well.
Look, if I was going to send anybody to broker international peace, it would probably be Alan Forel. So it would make sense that if somebody could bring Shima and Dragongate back together, it would be him.
Yeah, but so this Glate, I don't know which version
it's just awful. This is
Glate version 23 from Korakuen Hall. The last time they were in Korakuen Hall, it was the most depressing thing I've ever seen there. Main event again, El Lindemann and Ryuichi Shaman Kawakami for the G-Rex title. Lidet UWF, Katsuhiko Nakajima versus Shinya Aoki. I'm actually kind of stoked for this. It looks like that Nakajima is starting to do stuff with 0-1, so he might be Joe Lanza's problem soon. And then the other title match, Kazuma Sakamoto and Kaito Ishida versus JD Lee and Arashi.
I don't have faith that Nakajima and Aoki will be any good. The match I'm most intrigued by is actually Yamamura versus Jack Cartwheel on this show. I will be watching that.
I need to send you T-Hawk versus Shinya Aoki. It was awesome. And it's made me a little bit of a believer in Aoki in wrestling. I hate to say it.
No, I mean, I get the general idea of it, but what's funny, and I've said this before, what's funny about this company is that they just always put one person in a match that I just have no interest in seeing. And that includes singles matches, because Lindemann versus Kawakami I have no interest in the latter, but it's just like, it's Hayato Tamura and T-Hawk against Sota Manji, who I like, but I don't really care about Irie at this point in time. It's Sakamoto and Ishida, who I like as a team, versus Arashi and JD, and I don't really have any interest in Arashi. It's just, there's always, you look at these cards and you're always like, that is just deeply unsatisfying.
Yeah, and in Glate fashion, they have a Glate MMA match that they're feeding the guy who doesn't even wrestle anymore, Yu Iizuka, to Kawuno. So you still have a bit of that on here.
Yeah, no thank you. I'm good on that.
Yeah, no, but that is because it's a national holiday tomorrow. And that's why everyone has Wednesday shows. That's why New Beginning is tomorrow in Osaka, too.
Yes, gotcha. That makes sense. Mike, let's get to this last topic real quick.
Yeah, so kind of pulling back the curtain, we thought that this might be a little bit of a light week. And after all of the kind of discussion that we saw in the Discord about it and the anniversary thereof, we decided to talk about some disbands matches in history, and in particular take another look at what is considered one of the best disbands matches, not only in Dragongate history, but I'd argue in wrestling history in general. The three-way elimination loser must disband match from February 4th, 2016. Monster Express, Masato Yoshino, Akira Tozawa, T-Hawk, and Sachihoko Voy versus Dia.Hearts, Masaki Mochizuki, Dragon Kid KZ, and Big R Shimizu. I ripped on him last week for messing up his name, and then I do it here. Sorry, Shimizu. And Verserk, Shingo Takagi, Yamato, Naruki Doi, and Katoka, as well as a disband match that's a disband contra deportation match from 2014, from November 6th. Oritachi Veteran Gun, or We Are Team Veteran, Shima, Don Fuji, Gamma, and Super Shisha versus the Millennials, T-Hawk, Eita, Flamita, and Maria. And just in a way, like, I feel that there's a bit of a unit situation that we could be coming up upon a Disbands match in 2025. It just kind of felt like a good time to revisit one of the best Disbands matches in company history, and one of the ones that I feel like gets kind of forgotten a little bit. But upon rewatching, the passion of CIMA was at hand in 2014.
Yeah, so this is a November of 2014 match. So it's something that you and I would have watched in real time. This is still almost a year before I would have started doing written reviews, and I looked and it didn't look like Joe Lanza had a written review for this show on voicesofwrestling.com, which is a shame because he was doing a lot of the written reviews for the Corkins in this era. But in real time, do you remember anything about this match?
Oh yeah, the Millennials versus Team Veteran feud was pretty hot and heavy throughout the 2014, and especially as it relates to CIMA and T-Hawk. And it kind of, to be quite honest, like there's been like in a way for like a feud that does not have very many singles matches between the two of them. CIMA and T-Hawk kind of in a lot of ways they would gravitate towards each other coming out of this match up until essentially the formation of Verserk and the explosion of Mad Blanky that pulled T-Hawk into Monster Expression and the creation of Overgeneration.
Yeah, you're coming, just real quick, you're coming off of September Cork in a Summer Adventure Tag League where you have Osaka 06 versus T-Hawk and Eita, which was a match in the middle of the card where even, I mean, this is...
It got real.
Yeah, and this is the year of T-Hawk and Eita. I mean, the first half of the year, they have the great feud with Shingo and Tozawa, and this is right when I'm not only following Dragongate, but I'm full on obsessing about every single show at this point in time, and I was a huge fan of the Millennials, and I was a huge fan of that T-Hawk and Eita tag team specifically. So the first half of the year, they do all this stuff with Monster Express, and then you have this September Corkin show where you have CIMA and Gamma versus T-Hawk and Eita. And again, it's like match 4 on the show. And it not only is one of those where it's like, oh, wow, this is getting real. This is getting really intense. But it's one of the best matches to ever take place under the Summer Adventure Tag League branding. It was one of those that at the time I really enjoyed. But I've since gone back and watched it maybe 4 or 5 times in the decade since. And every time I rewatch it, it's just like, oh, my God, I'm picking up on something new every time, whether it's watching this era of Eita after watching 2026 Noah Eita, and you're just like, oh God, what could have been? Or you're watching T-Hawk, where at a point in time, in real time in 2014 and 2015, I was a massive T-Hawk fan, and I loved the work that he was doing, and I think a lot of it holds up. And then you've got this brilliant old-timey performance by Osaka 06 in that match, and then they have the rematch at Gate of Destiny, which is 2 weeks before, or not even 2 weeks, because what's the date on this, 11/6?
11/6, yeah.
Yeah, so that's 3 days before you've got this T-Hawk Eita Osaka 06 rematch, which that match I haven't seen in a while, but a lot of people think that is just as good as the Corkin match. And then
and Osaka 06 take the belts from them in Osaka.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was 3 days before this. In my head, this match was taking place a few weeks later, but no, this is 3 days before this. And so you just have this great run. The interesting thing with the Millennials and the Team Veteran stuff is that, in 2013, when the Millennials launch, they go through a bunch of these multi-man matches. And you and I always talk about the November of 2013 one. So a full year previous to this, when it was T-Hawk, Eita, and UT versus Mochi, Fuji, and Shisa, which is one of the most violent matches in company history. It's actually the October 2013 Corkin. It's one of the most violent matches in company history, with one of the most violent finishes I've ever seen, where Fuji had a full-on corked out Boston Crab on UT, and Mochizuki came in and did the Psycho high kick to the back of UT's head while he was in the Boston Crab. And a lot of those early Millennials versus Team Veterans matches look like that. And you see the growth in the Millennials unit a year later, where, you now have the full-on emergence of Flamita, and this is, in many ways, peak Flamita before maybe 2024 and 2025 with his return to Dragongate. You have Maria at one of her most interesting runs, healthy, fully fleshed out character, really interesting stuff there. And you're in the midst of the golden era of T-Hawk and Eita, and the way they're positioned in this match is that they are not only equal to the veterans at times, but they come out ahead in the end and look more dominant than this unit of old men. And I remember at the time being really blown away by how definitive the eventual finish of this match is, and really feeling like T-Hawk and Eita specifically were on the cusp of being giant stars.
Yeah, and on the other side of it, you have the fact that Shima in this, like, he gets a really good choice matchup with Flamita, and he, in a lot of ways, he is the glue of what we think about whenever we think about the veteran versus rookie kind of dynamic. You think about Shima essentially retiring a kid. Like, he has like a certain kind of edge when in these kinds of scenarios, and he provides like the level of gumption and, frankly, for lack of better words, balls that Shima has at a certain level, and especially at a time in 2014 where it's just pretty much like, oh, I'm going to set up T-Hawk and Eita, and I'm going to be the one person in the match to really get one over on them, because I'm going to do the blitzen into the super draw, and then I'm going to soak in the cheers because I'm Shima, and that's what I do. You have that happening on the same side that you have Super Shisa, and one of like these, I found myself a couple of weeks ago, I was out of podcasts, and I just, for some reason, I was like, you know what? I wanted to go back and revisit the conversation that Alan and I had about Akira Tozawa as the 30 for 30 series. And we talk about the lead up to the dissolution of the Tozawa Juku and how the Nanawa tag in that. And that was why I was like listening to this episode, because I knew we were talking about Nanawa tags, and how Shisa was kind of the hidden heater of that match in 2008. In this match, Shisa is able to kind of try to be the Yoshi Tonic Doctor, but instead ends up eating everything. And in a lot of ways, if you talk about these units and what happens to people after the unit's dissolution, in a way, it was like, oh, Shisa is no longer in the picture at this level anymore after T-Hawk puts him away with a electric chair variant of the Night Ride to fend off the We Are Team veteran team. And it's just like the amount of going for it on both sides, case like Eita just going for vertebreakers like crazy. It's a certain kind of air in this match that you don't necessarily get to see in a lot of modern Dragongate, I feel like.
So the specific spots that I want to mention here, I mentioned last week with Yoshioka and Kakuta that, you know, I was really disappointed that we didn't have some dramatic in-ring standoff with those guys. And I felt like it was a really missed opportunity to, even if there's one photographer at ringside there, to play to the cameras and to build this illusion that Yoshioka versus Kakuta should feel like this massive deal. And weirdly, you get that in this match with the Flamita Shima standoff near the start of this. And I always mention, when you go back and you watch the second WrestleMania weekend Dragongate 6-man, so this is Super Card of Honor 2 in Detroit, and this is the one that is, let me see if I can do this off the top of my head. It's Shima, Dragon Kid, Susumu against Mochi Shingo. That can't be right.
No,
I forget what the combination is.
Typhoon versus...
It was unaffiliated, because Typhoon versus Muscle Outlaws is the year after. But this is...
Yep, I was at Typhoon versus Muscle Outlaws. My bad.
And the dirty secret, as I always say, is that is a better in-ring contest than Blood Generation versus Doofixer. But it is it is what it is. I understand why people are partial to the 2006 match, but from a wrestling perspective, the 2008 match is actually better. But 2007 would have been Shima, Shingo, and Susumu versus Dragon Kid, Mochi, and Ryo Saito. Would not have gotten Saito with a gun to my head on that one. But I bring up that match because when you go back and rewatch it, Shima is the last one introduced. And they do, the in-ring intro where all the guys are already in the ring. And when Bobby Cruz says Shima's name, he gets such a loud ovation. And you see this look in Shima's eyes that is, honest to God, only comparable to an NBA player at the height of his powers in the playoffs, or Tiger Woods at the Masters, or Muhammad Ali in his prime. You get this look in CIMA's eyes where you're like, oh my God. First of all, dangerous because of this man's ego. He is feeding off of this audience in a way that is likely incredibly unhealthy. But
and as we could say, 19 years later, after reading those blog entries, it's still there. It's
oh
still
my
there.
God, yes. And it's, it's
That's why the blog
thing,
exists.
yeah. And it's the type of thing that separates great people from mediocre people. I hope I go through life people looking at me the same way that CIMA looked at that Detroit audience in 2007. Like, I honest to God hope so, because to me, it's a testament to his ability and his greatness that he had that look in his eyes. And in a totally different scenario, you see him present himself in a very similar way in that showdown with Flamita in the early part of the match. You're like, wow, this is like, CIMA's really treating this like a big deal. And just CIMA's presence alone is making Flamita look like a massive star, which is something that very few wrestlers in history have the ability to do. You have CIMA then later in the match. This is one of the other things that I loved, is there's a CIMA Eita sequence that is just so intense. I mean, they're doing
They are so
lucha.
good together.
They're so good together. Oh my God, it kills me that we don't really have like a proper great CIMA Eita singles match, because they are so good together. And what's crazy about the interactions here, and specifically in that sequence, is like, yes, they're doing this scientific, tricked out lucha grappling, but they're doing it more intense than maybe anybody that I've ever seen do it. There's an intensity to the work that CIMA and Eita do with one another in this match that is so welcome and is so missing from not only current day Dragongate, but just current day wrestling. I'm just not seeing guys lock up the way that CIMA and Eita did in this match, and it leads to sort of a 90s All Japan spot. It's one of my personal favorite things, is Eita ends up putting CIMA in the numero uno, and Gamma comes in and stomps on Eita to try to break up the submission, and Eita just shrugs it off. I mean, he is unfazed by Gamma's stomp, and so Don Fuji has to come in with an axe handle to break up the submission. But I love any time that a partner tries to break up a submission, and the guy on offense is unfazed by the breakup attempt. I think that's such a great spot.
Yeah, Fuji as a all-time heater, like throwing the water bottle, throwing like just completely like, well, we got Fuji throwing an ice bag in Kobe. It's worth saying we had that on the undercard. That was good. Don Fuji threw an ice bag at Mochizuki Jr. Sorry to jump back into time case, but just wanted to note that. But like Fuji in this match, and it's something that like, it's one of those things that like, I feel like the two of us, if we got in a room and if he was willing to, and basically like, all right, we have 3 hours of conversation with you, CIMA. Talk about your teamwork with Don Fuji, with Don Fuji kind of being the guy who bails you out of situations in these matches. And he just comes in like with absolute piss and fury, and it's incredible. And he just like no sells chops and then just chops T-Hawk in the throat. And it is the right kind of edge that like it goes back to like he's Sakunda Gaeta's favorite wrestler. They just don't know about it.
Yeah, Fuji is legitimately great in this match, and not in a sort of gimmicky, like undercard, wily veteran kind of way, but
not in the way that he was great against Jiro Shimbashi.
No, this was akin to the best Tenryu matches in Noah, or the best Kensei Sasaki matches as he got older. I mean, it's a legitimately great performance by him. The other thing that I want to mention, and it's funny, we recorded a podcast last Thursday on that Corkin show. I then wrote my review for that show on Saturday. And normally, if I can help it, I like to write the review and then do the podcast, but we recorded the day the show came out, so I only had time to watch it. I didn't have time to write anything. But I wrote that review Saturday, and then you DM'd me Sunday, and you said that you wanted to talk about this match, which was funny timing, because in that written review, one of the things that I started to harp on, as if I wasn't hard enough on the show last week, anyways, was I started thinking about Paradox, and a unit who, for all intents and purposes has now existed for 2 years. Because I think you can draw the beginning of Paradox back to Rey de Parejas 2024, when it was Yamato and Susumu versus Dragon Kid and Naruki Doi in the finals of that tournament. That feels like the spiritual beginning of Paradox, even if I don't think they form until June of that year officially.
No, I
And
agree with you.
yeah, and as you go through time, it's a unit that is defined partially by Yamato's Open the Dreamgate run, partially by some great not hug stuff. I think Susumu's had a few really fun outings along the way. By and large, Kagatora's held up his end of the bargain. BB Hulk has been fine. If anything, a net neutral. But we're now 2 years into what is very clearly positioned as a veteran unit, as guys that are maybe not, over the moon, but are certainly not in the primes of their careers. And that feels like the way that Paradox is being presented in a kayfabe way. And it's, the way it's being, it's just the way it is in all actuality. Why are we 2 years in and we don't have Paradox matches that mirror what Team Veteran was doing in this match? And then I watched the Kobe show and I saw what Yamato was doing against Kyuchi, and I was like, oh my God, they need to be in the ring together on every show for the rest of the year. If you're not going to push Yamato in a real way, and a real Yamato push is still to this day, I think either Dreamgate or Twingate and anything else is irrelevant. Can we have this guy do 2014 CIMA to the Young Natural Vibes guys in 2 Love and Peace? Like, Paradox existing is fine. I like the Paradox unit. I think they're by and large very good. But it is weird to me that we're not seeing Paradox matches with hatred, whether it's against Love and Peace or whether it's against this new Natural Vibes team or whether it's against D-Courage. They should be positioning themselves as like old-timey heels in the same way that in this match there was an element of that with CIMA and Fuji and Mochi and Shisa. I think Dragongate is now missing out on a huge opportunity by not taking what worked for Team Veteran and placing that into Paradox.
Yeah, and I feel like as maybe some of it is you have people like Susumu that like never really have played that kind of role, and there's a hesitancy there, and like Hulk being like that maybe is not there. But for characters like Yamato and like Kagatora and Naruki Doi, this should be exactly what they're doing. Like, if Kazuma Kimura is not going to join them, they should be beating him up every week.
Yeah.
If they're not doing something bigger with this. But yeah, and it also in a way makes me miss like the idea of the veteran, like this particular kind of heater that Super Shisa would play in these kind of matches, because Shisa never like a full-on frontline figure in any of these kind of units and in any of these kind of roles here. But whenever it's time for like a match like this, whenever there's like a big multi-man, the person that they call in is Super Shisa. And we don't have like, oh God, Paradox somehow accumulates enough people that Kenichiro Rai is the heater that comes in at certain times. Like we don't have that in this era. And it's not necessarily something that I think needs to happen, but it is an aspect of this match that shows us of things that happen at a time gone by. And I miss that a little bit.
I'm with you. It is such a stellar match. I think you can attach yourself to everybody at various points. It's a one fall unit disbands match, which I always think is such an interesting concept. But there's little stuff with T-Hawk that's great. There's little stuff with Eita that's great. Same with Flamita and Maria. On the veteran side, it really is a Hall of Fame level CIMA performance, and Mochi, Fuji, and Shisa do more than hold
Mochi's
their own
not in this match. Gamma is.
You're right. I'm sorry, Gamma. I've got the Tope Masaki from the next match in my head still, and just burned into my brain. But no, you're right. I mean, Gamma's great in this match.
Gamma's run like this, and Gamma's run like afterwards. I mean, you would have this soon after. You would have the zombie veterans that will be the Dragongate team that would join Mad Blanky for 2015 up until their close with them and Dia.Hearts. But this is kind of the last part of. And I know some of our listeners might be like, damn it, Mike, why are you saying this? But this is kind of like the last part of consequence for Gamma, other than like random times in Overgeneration.
Yeah, I mean, he has title matches in Overgeneration, but I don't think
other
fondly
than the
of
Punch
them.
Twingate match, we don't need to think about them that often.
Yeah, and you like that match for some weird reason. So yeah, it's not. I mean, I don't even have fond memories of the Shingo Dreamgate match. So yeah, this is sort of the end of the line for Gamma. I feel like maybe Is he in 12-116? Is he in that 10-man tag?
Yeah, he's in the 10-man tag.
Okay, all right. So he's got that at least.
Yeah. I mean, that was his great role because he would beat up the kids and spit water on them, and he was like the perfectly suitable fourth or fifth person on those veteran versus rookies matches.
Are we going to make these matches? This is a horrible thing to ask you on the air. Are we going to make these matches accessible for people?
I think some of the
Can you cut out the singular? If you can get me the files of just the individual matches, I can upload them on YouTube unlisted. I'd be more than happy. I want to make sure people watch these matches.
Yeah. I'll get you these shows. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. And yeah, the individual matches would be great. I'll put those on YouTube because we've also got to talk about the one that I mentioned last week was the 10-year anniversary of 2-4-16, which is one of my favorite Dragongate matches in history.
Yeah, that's right. This is the 3-way elimination. Loser must disband. Dia.Hearts versus Monster Express versus Verserk. And something that in the rewatch that I had to go back because I was watching the Infinity cut of it was this was a cork in that all of the Verserk guys had matches earlier on in the show before this. That like Shingo Takagi essentially has like 40 minutes of ring time on this show.
I do not remember that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, because he has a Pumping Hawk tag team match before this.
Yeah, so I reviewed this show for Voices of Wrestling, and there's a Lindemann versus Arikan singles match. That sounds
hell yeah.
I was like, man, that sounds like so much fun. And then Don Fuji and Yosuke Santa Maria versus Cyber Kong and Kagetora, which I gave 3 1/4 to. And then Yamato, Doi, and Shingo versus Jimmy Susumu, Ryo Jimmy Saito, and Genki Horiguchi, which I gave 3 3/4 to. And then they wrestled this match. Man, that's funny because I've rewatched this match a ton over the last decade, but I have not rewatched the rest of this show. That never occurred. I completely forgot about that.
It was just because I was fast forward scrubbing and I was like, wait, was this from a different show? And I had to pull up the cage match. I was like, no. And Shingo changes his tights from the yellow Verserk gear to the red Verserk gear at intermission because Shingo Takagi is a fucking professional case.
Yeah, well, and as it's been established, the yellow singlet, one of the great looks in wrestling history, the yellow trim on that Verserk era singlet, the greatest.
Yeah, and I think the thing that just like with this match, I think that out of the eras of them running these elimination style matches, doing a match where basically this match goes until one side is completely eliminated, they are the losers, they disband. Something that when you hear 3-way elimination, loser must disband, it does kind of make you think like, okay, what kind of Chikara stuff is happening here? But instead, it's a very kind of simple twist on the match format, and it very quickly is a lot of fast eliminations. You get a sudden Shin Saikyo high kick eliminating Katoka like right off the bat, and it turns into a overall kind of just tour de force from Monster Express. And there's something about 2016 Big Boss Shimizu. Big R Shimizu at that point is just so much fun, and like the way that it's all worked with like him and the Senkaku Gary triangle kick into the shot put slam, eliminating T-Hawk, and the way that at a certain point it kind of turns into, oh God, it's 2-on-2-on-2, but those two are Doyama, and they are able to take control and all of the great passion of Monster Express stuff into it. And just the way that they eliminate the sequence that happens at the end that goes shot put slam into Torbolino, into shot put slam, into Hurricane Rana had me jump out of my seat and start shouting at that point, because from there you get the Passion of KZ, and it's one of the easy 5-star Dragongate matches in history, and ends up being a Galleria kick out into a Dojima sleeper, Bakatari sliding kick into a Galleria again. And maybe I did not give Dia.Hearts enough credit at the time, but I love them in this match. Like, it's just the four of them are so good together in this.
I'm always super pro Dia.Hearts. I love that unit in real time. I remember being so excited when Shimizu got added to that unit. I thought that was great. There was a brief moment in time where I guess it might have been in the same way that Paradox sort of has that unofficial beginning. I guess there might have been a point where Dia.Hearts were teaming, but they
Right,
didn't
they
have
were.
that. They didn't have that name yet because they were
I
going
do
by
know what
team.
they're
They
Team
were going by team.
Pantaloons.
Yeah, Team Pantaloons. Because there was a T-Hawk and Eita versus Mochi Dragon Kid Twin Gate match that is from Dangerous Gate. So again, just that timeline of T-Hawk and Eita versus Tozawa and Shingo at Kobe World 2014, and then T-Hawk and Eita versus Osaka. No. So Dangerous Gate would have been in August that year. So it would have been T-Hawk and Eita versus Shingo and Tozawa at World 2014. T-Hawk and Eita versus Mochi and Dragon Kid at Dangerous Gate that year. T-Hawk and Eita versus Osaka 06 at the September Korakuen. T-Hawk and Eita versus Susumu and Kagatora in the Summer Adventure Tag League Finals. And then they might have run that match back in Hakata. And then there's the Osaka 06 rematch in Osaka for Gate of Destiny. And then there's the unit disbands match, just to once again go back on how incredible that T-Hawk and Eita run as a tag team was. But Dia.Hearts were a great unit. I was very, very connected to them. I really liked them just as like a, hey, I just like having these guys around, fun babyface unit. BB Hulk, very good Dreamgate champion. Mochi and Dragon Kid were doing great work. And this is really, this was a unit that was at various points in times, the focus became KZ. He wins the Bravegate belt in February of 2015. And that, he doesn't win the Bravegate belt. He goes to the finals of the Bravegate tournament against Tozawa in February of 2015. And it was like, okay, this KZ guy is something, he's somebody to keep an eye on. And it's this match a year later where it was, I think, the first time collectively that we all knew at that point that KZ was a capital G great wrestler. And I think that comes from this match. The rules of it being, the first unit to be totally eliminated is the unit that is forced to disband. And so you lose Shimizu, you lose Mochizuki first, which I think is really interesting, and then you lose Dragon Kid, and then you lose Shimizu, and KZ ends up being the guy that ends up ending Dia.Hearts because he's the one eliminated at the very end of the match, whereas Yoshino survives and Doyama were left standing for Verserk. And I really like the format of this match, but that was my takeaway in real time was I think we all left looking at KZ differently. What impresses me now is when I go back and watch this match, there's all this great character work done with Kotoka at the start of the match. There is, I think, some level of revisionist history in this Shingo Sachihoko boy feud and the level of importance it had and the level of greatness that Sachihoko boy was at. But it all pays off in this match where you get this great moment where Sachihoko boy pins Shingo with a flash pin, and then he tries to do the same thing to Naruki Doi, and Doi flips the pin and then pins Sachihoko boy immediately after that. That is excellent. You're at a point in time where you're getting Yamadoi really dialed in because this is the end of their run. I mean, they would disband, or Yamato would get turned on in May, so you're looking at the tail end of things. But there's that I think it's the July 2015 Korakuen that was headlined by Yamadoi versus, again, T-Hawk and Eita. And Yamadoi kind of squashed them. Like, it's a very odd, historically Dragongate Korakuen Hall main event. It really sticks out just in the style of work compared to the rest of history, basically. And I remember, like, around that time, it was like, oh, Yamadoi's, like, this is going to be a thing. And then Verserk happens, and they're even more of a thing in Verserk than they were in Mad Blanky. And they sort of take the crown of being the best tag team in the promotion at the time. And so I loved the gimmick that they together were standing tall, whereas Shingo was bounced and Kotoka was bounced super early. So you get all of those great things. The other thing that I was painfully reminded of in this match, is Masato Yoshino. Man, that just, it is a shame that his legacy has become what it has become. Really, I guess through I don't know why we all look at Yoshino the way that we do, but he is historically like an all-time great. And him throwing the baseball lariat at Yamato towards the tail end of this match is a reminder of like, oh yeah, there was a 7-year run where Yoshino was one of the great figureheads in wrestling.
Oh, Yoshino's the one that whenever I go back and rewatch like matches and then he's in it, and especially if it's before 2017, you just go like, holy shit, this guy was 101.
Yeah.
Like that, and it's one of those things that like I'm now like instantly look at like his final shoe pro cover and I'm like, man, like he really was like something else, especially because like he gets Yamato in the Sol Naciente and basically the entire world is holding back Naruki Doi from breaking it up, and like that was just after the baseball lariat. Like it's a shame no one got the baseball lariat when he was retiring, because it's like one of those
I don't think anybody in wrestling throws the lariat the way that he does.
Hayato Tamura, given that he has like he had like a baseball like gimmick, should have gotten that, like if they wanted to make that guy anything. But like you were talking about like Don Fuji's like breakups being like one of those things that like it's on the list, like baseball slides for us, like great baseball slides. Naruki Doi has a top 5 all-time reverse DDT in this match. Like
yeah, he does.
He just absolutely, I think it was on Dragongate, he just absolutely like throws it like with like the level of force that whenever you see like the stroke or whatever Miz calls that move, skull crushing finale, and it looks like too much of like a performance. This one was like, nope, he sweeps out your leg and yanks you down at the same time. It was one of those things that it was like stand and applaud Naruki Doi for doing like something that is done a lot of time and not done very well, but doing it like the absolute best version I've seen of it in like 5 years.
It's a really special match. I have it at 4 3/4. It is, I tend to resist the idea of enjoying things off of purely nostalgic reasons as much as I can, but it is one of those matches where I'm like, I just, especially the first half of 2016, it's like, oh man, I just like the way this promotion looks. I like the way the crowd sounds. I like all of the units involved. It did, again, I try to resist this as much as I can, but it did sort of hit me like a warm blanket. Yeah, Yoshino in the orange, just the existence of Tozawa, Shingo in this era being, just a really, really special wrestler. And again, like I look back on Dia.Hearts as a really fun unit, in that breakout, era of Shimazu and that breakout era of KZ and some really, really good Mochizuki stuff that I think is just sort of sandwiched in between some high-level team veteran stuff and then that Dreamgate run in 2017. So it gets a little shuffled over in the context of such a long career. But unit for unit, I think he did some of his best work in Dia.Hearts.
No, I think that's a fair point, and that might be something worth a deeper discussion when we get to that time of the year this year. But we do have a production note for y'all. Next week will be a 2-episode week for us. Expect at the usual time a review of Kyoto, a more in-depth Uno Dos Tres preview. Expect that we'll have a full card by then. There has to be at that point. But looking towards probably in your feeds on the 20th, we will be returning to those days. So we have, is this Fukumen League? I think it is Fukumen League coming up for us next week.
Yes, it is.
So expect that when next week in your feeds. You can follow us on social media at Open VoiceGate. Cases at _ in your case. I'm at Fujiheya. Thanks for listening to VoiceGate. We'll be back with you next week. Take care, everyone.
Hello, Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network listeners. I am Jeff Hawkins, co-host of Shake Them Ropes, with a very special announcement. If it's been a while or you've never listened to us before, the original gang is back. Myself and Rob McCarran, back talking wrestling. We have no idea where this show's going to go, where we're going to keep any of the old bits or any of the old things in there. It's going to be a process. It's going to be a journey, and we'd like for you to come along with us. Only on Shake Them Ropes on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.